The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, its domed ceiling displaying the swirling colors of nearby nebulae. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated atmospheric pods, each environment carefully calibrated for their biological needs. The air hummed, with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different communication methods into something resembling universal understanding. At the center of it all stood Dr. Sarah Chun, completely unaware that she was about to become the most famous human in the galaxy. "The test has been prepared," announced Vextar, the Zolonian High Arbiter. His serpentine form coiled around his floating platform as he addressed the assembly. "For 3,000 cycles, no species has successfully completed the cognitive maze. It remains our most reliable method of determining a civilization's worthiness for advanced galactic citizenship." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her environmental suit. She'd been on Zephyr Station for only 6 months as part of humanity's first diplomatic exchange program. The other species had been polite but distant, treating humans like curious children who'd somehow stumbled into adult conversation. Now, they wanted to test her species' intelligence through her performance in some ancient puzzle. "The human representative will attempt the trial," continued Vextar. "Should she fail, as statistical probability suggests she will, humanity's application for advanced status will be postponed for another century." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Several species made sounds that Sarah's translator interpreted as amusement. The Krillians, who resembled walking crystals, chimed in what she now recognized as their version of laughter. Even the usually stoic Meridians, whose gray faces rarely showed emotion, seemed to be suppressing what might have been smiles. Sarah had studied the records available to humans about this test. The cognitive maze was described in their limited documentation as a multidimensional challenge requiring unprecedented mental flexibility and problem-solving capabilities. Every species that had attempted it over the past 3 millennia had failed within the first few hours. The current record holder, the Alikari Confederacy, had lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes before declaring the test impossible. "Dr. Chin," Vextar's mechanical voice drew her attention back to the present. "Are you prepared to represent your species in this endeavor?" Sarah nodded, though she noticed her hands were slightly shaking. "I'm ready." "Excellent. You will have unlimited time to complete the maze, though we expect you will concede defeat within the day, as is traditional." Vextar gestured toward a shimmering portal that had appeared at the chamber's far end. "The test begins upon entry. Good fortune, young human." As Sarah walked toward the portal, she caught fragments of conversation from the various diplomatic pods. The translators weren't perfect, but she heard enough to understand the general sentiment. Poor creature doesn't realize what she's walking into. Humans show promise in some areas, but this requires thinking beyond their dimensional limitations. Perhaps it's better they learn their limitations now, rather than later. Sarah paused at the portal's threshold. The energy field buzzed against her skin, making the hair on her arms stand up. She looked back at the assembled representatives, all watching her with what she could only interpret as pity. "You know what?" she said, loud enough for the translators to pick up her voice. "This is going to be fun." The comment sent a wave of confusion through the chamber. The Zolonian Arbiter's head tilted in a way that suggested bewilderment. "Fun?" His translator repeated the word as if testing its pronunciation. "Yeah," Sarah grinned. "I love puzzles. Always have. Thanks for the entertainment." She stepped through the portal before anyone could respond. The world that materialized around Sarah defied every law of physics she understood. She stood on a platform that seemed to be made of solid light, suspended in what looked like the interior of a vast geometric structure. The walls curved and folded in impossible ways, creating surfaces that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Gravity seemed to work differently in different areas. She could see what appeared to be water flowing upward in spiraling helixes, while chunks of crystalline matter floated in perfect geometric patterns. In front of her, a soft blue glow outlined what was obviously the first challenge. It appeared to be a door, but one that existed in at least 5 dimensions simultaneously. Looking at it directly made Sarah's eyes water, but she learned to deal with visual complexity during her years studying theoretical physics. "Okay," she said to herself, pulling out a small notebook she always carried. "Let's see what we're working with." The first thing she noticed was that the door wasn't actually locked. Instead, it seemed to exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously open and closed until observed from the correct dimensional perspective. Sarah had read about similar concepts in theoretical papers, but seeing one in practice was something else entirely. She began walking around the door, noting how its appearance changed from different angles. When viewed from directly in front, it appeared solid and impassable. From the left side, it seemed to flicker between states. From above, and she had to climb onto a floating crystal platform to get that perspective. It looked completely transparent. "Interesting," she murmured, scribbling notes. "It's not about force or finding a hidden mechanism. It's about understanding the observer effect on quantum dimensional states." Sarah spent the next hour mapping the door's properties from every angle she could reach. The floating platforms responded to her intentions, rising or lowering as needed to give her different viewpoints. What had initially seemed like impossible geometry was actually an elegant mathematical structure, just one that required thinking beyond traditional three-dimensional constraints. The breakthrough came when she realized she needed to observe the door from 2 specific angles simultaneously. By positioning herself at coordinates that created what she recognized as a mathematical conjugate pair, the door's quantum state collapsed into a stable open configuration. She stepped through and found herself in a vast chamber filled with what looked like a 3-dimensional chess game designed by someone who'd clearly never heard of limiting themselves to 3 dimensions. "Oh, this is definitely going to be fun," Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. Back in the council chamber, the assembled representatives watched Sarah's progress on the massive holographic display that showed her every move within the maze. What should have been a quick defeat was turning into something none of them had expected. "She's enjoying herself," observed Representative Yith of the Cephalopod Collective, her tentacles writhing in confusion. The biometric readings show elevated dopamine levels and increased neural activity consistent with pleasure responses. Vextar's serpentine form had coiled tighter around his platform. "This is unprecedented. Most species show extreme stress responses within the first few minutes. Fear, frustration, despair. These are the normal reactions to the maze's complexity." On the display, they watched Sarah pull out some sort of primitive recording device and begin documenting her observations of the multidimensional chess puzzle. She was actually taking notes, treating the trial like an academic exercise rather than an impossible test. "Look at her approach," said Mordak, the crystalline representative. "She's not trying to solve it through brute force or advanced technology. She's using observational analysis and pattern recognition." "Primitive methods," scoffed the Alikari delegate, still bitter about his species' failure at the trial. "She'll reach the same walls we all did. The maze is designed to be unsolvable." But as they watched, Sarah began to interact with the dimensional chess puzzle in ways that puzzled the observers. Instead of trying to move the pieces according to traditional strategic thinking, she seemed to be testing the rules themselves. She'd move a piece, observe the result, make a note, then try something different. "What is she doing?" asked the Meridian representative. Dr. KYTH, the Zephyrian xenopsychologist who'd been studying human behavior, leaned forward in his observation pod. "I believe she's reverse engineering the game's rule structure. Rather than assuming she knows how it works, she's treating it as an unknown system to be decoded." On screen, Sarah had discovered that the chess pieces could move through dimensions in ways that weren't immediately obvious. What looked like a standard bishop could actually slide through dimensional folds to appear in completely different sections of the board. She'd figured this out by systematically testing each piece type, documenting their movement capabilities, and building a functional understanding of the game's true rules. "Remarkable," whispered the Etherian delegate, their energy form flickering with what might have been excitement. "She's not trying to apply her existing knowledge to the puzzle. She's learning the puzzle's own internal logic. 2 hours into the trial, Sarah completed the dimensional chess challenge by achieving what the game defined as checkmate. Though her solution involved moving her king through 7 dimensions simultaneously to capture the opposing queen from a direction that technically didn't exist in normal space. Dimensional chess, she said to herself, making a final note. Tricky, but logical once you understand that the board exists in a hyperspace matrix. I wonder what's next. The next chamber made Sarah laugh out loud. It contained what was obviously a massive mechanical puzzle. Gears and wheels and rotating platforms all interconnected in a complex mechanism that spanned multiple levels. But the gears were rotating in patterns that defied mechanical logic, some turning through each other without interaction, others connecting across empty space. "Oh, this is beautiful," she said, immediately beginning her systematic exploration. Temporal mechanics in the gear ratios. Someone has been very, very clever. In the council chamber, the mood was shifting from amused condescension to concerned bewilderment. Dr. Chun had been the maze for 3 hours now, longer than any species in recent memory, and her stress indicators remained remarkably low. If anything, she seemed to be having the time of her life. Her heart rate is actually decreasing, reported the medical monitoring team. Brain activity shows patterns consistent with deep focus and problem-solving engagement. She's exhibiting what humans call flow state, optimal performance psychology. Vexstar's translator crackled with static as he processed this information. She's relaxing? During the trial? They watched Sarah tackle the temporomechanical puzzle with the same methodical enthusiasm she'd shown with the previous challenges. She'd identified that different sections of the mechanism operated in different time streams, and was now figuring out how to synchronize them to achieve what was presumably the puzzle solution state. The human approach is unlike anything in our records, observed Dr. KYTH. Every other species has treated the maze as a test to be passed or failed. She's treating it as a learning experience to be enjoyed. Absurd, muttered the Alikari delegate. The maze is specifically designed to be frustrating and impossible. The psychological pressure is part of the test. Perhaps, said Dr. KYTH thoughtfully, that's exactly the problem. We've been designing tests based on our own assumptions about challenge and difficulty. But what if a species exists that genuinely enjoys complex problem-solving for its own sake? On the display, Sarah had discovered that the temporal mechanics could be influenced by moving through the mechanism at specific velocities. By essentially dancing through the rotating gears at precisely timed intervals, she could create resonance patterns that synchronized the different time streams. It was an elegant solution that required perfect timing, spatial awareness, and an intuitive understanding of temporal mathematics. When the mechanism clicked into alignment and a new passage opened, Sarah actually applauded. Temporal mechanics and kinesthetic problem-solving, she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Whoever designed this really understands how to make learning fun. I wonder if they take students. The comment sent a ripple of shock through the council chamber. Students? She was talking about the impossible test, as if it were an educational experience she wanted to repeat. 4 hours, announced the timekeeper. Dr. Chun has now exceeded the previous record by over 43 minutes. And she shows no signs of psychological fatigue or surrender, added the medical team. Her curiosity indicators remained extremely high. Vexstar's serpentine form had gone completely still, a sign of deep contemplation in Zolonian culture. What have we been missing? He wondered aloud. 3,000 cycles of testing, and we've never encountered a species that approached the maze this way. Perhaps, suggested the Etherian delegate, their energy form pulsing thoughtfully, we've been testing for the wrong qualities. We've measured problem-solving speed, psychological resilience, and technical knowledge. But we've never tested for joy and discovery. The fourth chamber revealed Sarah's next challenge, and even she paused to whistle in appreciation. It was a room-sized crystalline structure that appeared to contain an entire miniature universe, complete with swirling galaxies and what looked like developing star systems. The challenge was apparently to navigate through this cosmic maze and reach the central structure without disturbing the delicate gravitational balances that kept the mini-universe stable. Now this, Sarah said with genuine wonder, is what I call a puzzle. She spent an hour just observing the system, noting how gravitational influences propagated through the crystalline medium and how her presence affected the delicate balances. When she finally began to move, it was with the careful precision of someone who understood that they were interacting with something beautiful and complex that deserved respect. The assembled representatives watched in fascination as Sarah navigated the cosmic maze, not by trying to force her way through, but by learning to work with the gravitational currents. She discovered that by moving in specific patterns, she could use the existing gravitational fields to carry her toward her destination without creating disruptive influences. She's surfing the gravitational waves, observed the cephalopod representative with something that might have been admiration. More than that, said Dr. KYTH. She's treating the mini-universe as a living system rather than an obstacle to overcome. Her approach suggests a fundamental respect for complexity rather than a desire to dominate it. 5 hours into the trial, Sarah reached the center of the cosmic maze. But instead of immediately proceeding to the next challenge, she spent another 30 minutes just marveling at the miniature universe she'd successfully navigated. Her biometric readings showed pure wonder and appreciation. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she said to the recording systems, unaware that her words were being translated and transmitted to the council chamber. Whoever created this understands the elegance of cosmic mechanics on an intuitive level. This isn't just a test, it's art. In the observation chamber, something unprecedented was happening. Representatives who had spent millennia viewing the cognitive maze as a grueling trial were beginning to see it through human eyes as a masterwork of engineering and creativity designed to showcase the beauty of complex problem solving. "She's recontextualizing our understanding of our own test," realized Dr. KYTH. "We've been so focused on measuring failure that we've forgotten to appreciate the achievement of creating these challenges in the first place." When the passage to the fifth chamber opened, Sarah entered to find what was clearly the maze's final challenge. It was a room that seemed to contain nothing at all, just empty space with a single pedestal in the center bearing a simple question written in holographic letters that adapted to her language. "What is the purpose of challenge?" Sarah read the question and smiled. After 5 hours of the most engaging problem-solving she'd ever experienced, the answer seemed obvious. "To learn," she said simply. "To grow. To discover what's possible when you push beyond what you thought you could do. And to have fun doing it." The holographic letters shimmered and rearranged themselves. "Why do you seek to advance your species' status in the galactic community?" Sarah considered this more carefully. It was clearly the real test. Not the puzzle she'd solved, but her understanding of what those puzzles represented. "Because we want to learn more," she said finally. "Because there's so much we don't know, and so much beauty in discovering new ways of thinking and being. We don't want advanced status to prove we're superior. We want it because we think we can contribute to making the universe a more interesting place." The hologram flickered and displayed a final question. "What would you change about this trial?" Sarah laughed. "Are you kidding? This was amazing. I'd love to go through it again, maybe try some of the puzzles with different approaches. Actually, I'd love to meet whoever designed it and learn about their creative process. This whole thing is a masterclass in elegant problem design." The room filled with light, and Sarah found herself standing back in the council chamber, facing 47 very confused alien representatives. "Congratulations, Dr. Chun," said Vextar, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what he was congratulating her for. "You have completed the cognitive maze, the first being to do so in 3,000 cycles." "Really?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic. When can I try the advanced version?" The question sent a wave of bewildered silence through the chamber. "Advanced version? Vextar reported slowly. Well, that was obviously the basic test, right? I mean, it was challenging, but it was clearly designed as an introduction to advanced problem-solving concepts. I assume the real trials are even more complex. Dr. KYEH leaned forward in his pod. Dr. Chun, what you just completed was our most difficult challenge. It was designed to be impossible. Sarah blinked in surprise. Impossible? But it was completely logical. Every puzzle had elegant solutions once you understood the underlying principles. They were complex, sure, but definitely solvable. Actually, they were kind of perfect, challenging enough to be engaging without being frustratingly difficult. She paused, looking around at the stunned faces of the galactic representatives. Wait, she said slowly. You guys have been using this as a test of whether species are worthy of advancement? That's like using a beautiful piece of music to test whether someone deserves to hear more music. The point isn't to pass or fail. The point is to experience the joy of engaging with something beautiful and complex. In the silence that followed, the fundamental assumption underlying 3 millennia of galactic civilization quietly cracked apart. The cognitive maze hadn't been impossible after all. It had just been designed by species who had forgotten how to find joy in the act of discovery itself. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of Sarah's completion of the cognitive maze. For the first time in recorded history, species representatives were questioning fundamental assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. The implications are staggering, Dr. KYEH was saying, his Zephyrian features flickering between colors as he processed the psychological ramifications. If the human approach to complex problem-solving represents a viable alternative to our established methods, we may need to reconsider our entire educational and advancement framework. Sarah sat in what had hastily been designated as the human consultation pod, still wearing her environmental suit and looking somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. She'd gone from being a minor diplomatic exchange participant to the center of a galaxy-wide philosophical crisis in less than a day. I still don't understand what the big deal is, she said, adjusting her suit's communication system. It was a really well-designed puzzle sequence. Challenging, elegant, educational. The kind of thing any good university would be proud to include in their advanced coursework. Vextar's serpentine form had been coiled in the same position for 3 hours, a sign of deep contemplation that was making the other Zolonians nervous. Dr. Chun, he said finally, you described the maze as educational. This suggests you believe its primary purpose was to teach rather than to test. Well, obviously, Sarah replied. I mean, what's the point of a test that doesn't teach you anything? The best challenges are the ones that expand your understanding while you're working through them. Every section of the maze introduced new concepts and built on previous learning. It was brilliant pedagogy disguised as assessment. Representative Mordak's crystalline form chimed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as deep thoughtfulness. In our culture, tests and education are separate functions. Tests measure existing capabilities. Education develops new ones. You seem to suggest these can be the same process. Of course they can be, Sarah said, pulling out her notebook. Look, every puzzle in the maze taught me something new while testing my ability to apply it. The dimensional door taught me about quantum observation effects. The chess game showed me how strategic thinking works in hyperspace. The mechanical puzzle demonstrated temper mathematics. The cosmic maze was a lesson in gravitational dynamics and systems thinking. And the final question made me articulate my own motivations and values. She flipped through her pages of notes, which had grown into a detailed analysis of each challenge's educational components. By the time I finished, I understood concepts I'd never encountered before. That's not just testing, that's transformation. The maze didn't just measure my intelligence. It actively made me more intelligent. A profound silence settled over the chamber as the implications of this perspective rippled through the assembled representatives. Dr. Yith of the Cephalopod Collective spoke first, her tentacles weaving complex patterns that our translator rendered as thoughtful uncertainty. Our species has treated the maze as a barrier for 3,000 cycles. Those who failed were deemed insufficiently advanced. We never considered that the failure might indicate a problem with our approach rather than our capabilities. The Alikari Confederacy attempted the trial 17 times over the past millennium, admitted their delegate, his crystalline voice carrying what might have been embarrassment. Each failure was interpreted as confirmation that we needed more technological development before trying again. We never questioned whether our fundamental approach to problem-solving might be incomplete. Sarah looked around the chamber with growing understanding. You've all been approaching this as a pass-fail evaluation instead of a learning experience. No wonder it felt impossible. You were so focused on being judged that you couldn't enjoy the process of discovery. Enjoy. The word came from several translators simultaneously, as if the concept needed verification. Yes, enjoy. Fun. Pleasure in learning. Sarah's enthusiasm was evident even through her environmental suit's filters. Learning should be joyful. Problem-solving should be engaging. When you're having fun with a challenge, your brain works better. You become more creative, more persistent, more willing to try unconventional approaches. She stood up, her excitement overcoming her diplomatic caution. Don't you see? The maze wasn't designed to exclude people. It was designed to transform them. But that only works if you engage with it as a growth opportunity instead of a judgment. Vextar's mechanical voice carried an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. Dr. Chun, are you suggesting that the fundamental purpose of the cognitive maze has been misunderstood for 3 millennia? I'm suggesting, Sarah said carefully, that maybe the species who designed it understood something about learning and growth that got lost over time. Think about it. Who creates a challenge that elaborate unless they want people to succeed? Unless they want to share knowledge and inspire discovery. The chamber erupted in discussion as species groups began rapid communication among their own kind. The translators struggled to keep up with overlapping conversations in dozens of languages, creating a cacophony of debate that filled the vast space. Through the chaos, Dr. KYTH's voice cut clearly. What if we've been using the maze backwards? What if its original purpose was to identify species ready to become teachers and guides rather than those seeking to be judged and ranked? The conversations stopped abruptly as this possibility settled into the collective consciousness of the gathered representatives. Teachers, repeated the Etherian delegate, their energy form pulsing with rapid calculations. Species who could contribute to galactic knowledge rather than merely consume it. Sarah nodded eagerly. Exactly. The maze tests for curiosity, persistence, creativity, and the ability to find joy in complex challenges. Those aren't just signs of intelligence. They're the characteristics you want in collaborators and educators. But then, said the Meridian representative slowly, what does it mean that humanity is the first species to complete the trial in 3,000 cycles? The question hung in the air like a challenge itself, laden with implications that none of them were entirely ready to face. It means, said Sarah quietly, that maybe the galaxy has been approaching learning and advancement from the wrong direction. Instead of asking, are we good enough to join the advanced civilizations? Maybe the question should be, what can we contribute to make galactic civilization more advanced? The next several hours saw something unprecedented in the history of the Galactic Council, a complete restructuring of fundamental assumptions about intelligence, capability, and the purpose of advancement trials. Dr. KYTH had called for a comprehensive review of the historical records surrounding the cognitive maze's origins. What they discovered changed everything. The maze was created by the architects, Dr. KYTH announced to the reassembled council. A coalition of 3 ancient species who vanished from this region of the galaxy approximately 4,000 cycles ago. According to the recovered records, they designed the trial as what they called a gift to future learners. A gift. Vextar's form had finally uncoiled slightly as new information provided framework for understanding. not a barrier or test, but a gift. The documentation is clear, Dr. Kyeh continued. The architects intended the maze to be what they termed a teaching tool for species ready to embrace collaborative learning. They believed that any civilization capable of finding joy in complex discovery would be ready to contribute to what they called the great work of understanding. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The great work of understanding. That sounds like they were talking about something bigger than just individual species advancement. Much bigger, Dr. Kyeh confirmed. The architect appeared to have been working toward what they described as universal educational synthesis, a galactic-wide sharing of knowledge, perspectives, and learning methodologies across all species. The implications were staggering. For 3 millennia, the galactic community had been using an educational tool as a competitive barrier, completely missing its intended purpose. Representative Yith's tentacles moved in what Sarah was learning to recognize as excitement. If Dr. Chen's approach to the maze represents what the architects intended, then humanity may be the first species in 3,000 cycles to demonstrate readiness for this great work. But that raises an obvious question, interjected the Alikari delegate. If the maze was meant to identify collaborators and educators, why did the architects disappear? What happened to their great work? Dr. Kyeh's form flickered through several color phases, indicating deep uncertainty. The records become unclear around 4,000 cycles ago. There are references to what they called the Great Frustration, a period when their educational initiatives apparently met with repeated failure and resistance. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. They got discouraged. They created this beautiful learning tool, but nobody approached it the way they intended. Instead of finding collaborative learners, they kept encountering species who treated it as a competition or barrier. The records support this interpretation. Dr. Kyeh agreed. Final entries suggest the architects concluded that this region of the galaxy was not yet ready for collaborative advancement and departed to seek learners worthy of the gift of knowledge. The chamber fell silent as the full tragedy of the situation became clear. The galactic community had spent 3,000 years failing to understand a gift specifically designed to help them advance, while the species who created it had given up hope and left. So what do we do now? Asked the crystalline representative. We've finally identified our fundamental error. How do we correct 3 millennia of misunderstanding? Sarah stood up again, her notebook clutched in her hands. We start over. We approach the maze the way it was meant to be approached, as a learning experience designed to prepare us for collaboration. And we do it together. Together. Multiple translators rendered the question with varying degrees of confusion. Yes, together. The maze was designed for individual completion because personal growth has to happen at an individual level. But the knowledge gained can be shared. The perspectives developed can be combined. The joy of discovery can be multiplied. She opened her notebook and looked at her detailed analysis of each challenge. I learned an enormous amount in those 5 hours, but I learned it from a human perspective using human problem-solving approaches. What would a Zolonian learn from the temporal mechanics puzzle? How would a crystalline interpret the dimensional chess game? What insights would an Etherian bring to the cosmic maze? The enthusiasm in her voice was infectious. Several representatives were leaning forward in their pods, and translation devices were struggling to keep up with rapid interspecies discussions. Dr. Chun is proposing a fundamental shift in methodology, observed Vextar. Instead of competitive individual trials, collaborative exploration, and shared learning. Exactly. And not just for the maze, but for everything. Instead of asking which species is advanced enough for higher status, we ask, what unique perspectives can each species contribute to collective understanding? Dr. Kyeh's form was cycling through rapid color changes, indicating intense excitement. This aligns perfectly with the architect's vision of universal educational synthesis. Shared knowledge, combined perspectives, collaborative learning. But How do we implement such a radical change? Asked the Meridian representative. Our entire governmental structure is based on hierarchical advancement and competitive status. Sarah grinned. The same way anyone implements systemic change, one step at a time with lots of experimentation and learning from mistakes. And most importantly, by making it fun. There's that word again, observed Representative Yith. Fun. You consistently return to the concept of enjoyment in learning. Because it works, Sarah said simply. When learning is enjoyable, beings engage more deeply, retain information better, and develop greater creativity. The architects understood this. The maze is designed to be engaging and rewarding. We just forgot to appreciate those qualities. She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. What if we started by having other species attempt the maze using collaborative approaches? Not as individual trials, but as shared learning experiences? What if we documented different species' perspectives and problem-solving methods? A systematic study of cognitive diversity applied to complex problem-solving, Dr. KYTH translated. Building a database of different approaches to challenge and discovery. And then we share all of it, Sarah continued. Every insight, every creative solution, every unique perspective. We build a collective understanding that's greater than the sum of its parts. Vextar's serpentine form had begun to move in slow, thoughtful patterns. This would require unprecedented cooperation between species, sharing of methodologies and cognitive approaches that have traditionally been considered competitive advantages. Competitive advantages in a competitive system, Sarah pointed out. But if the system itself becomes collaborative, then shared knowledge becomes a collective advantage for everyone. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but it was a different kind of debate than the Galactic Council had ever experienced. Instead of arguing about relative status and hierarchical positioning, the representatives found themselves discussing learning theory, cognitive diversity, and collaborative methodologies. For the first time in recorded history, the focus was on how to build collective capability rather than how to rank individual achievement. As the session extended into what humans would consider the next day, something remarkable was happening. Species that had maintained formal diplomatic distance for centuries were beginning to share genuine insights about their unique approaches to problem-solving and learning. The Crystallians revealed their method of harmonics-based information processing. The cephalopods demonstrated their parallel path cognitive modeling. The Etherians explained their energy flow approaches to understanding complex systems. Each species brought perspectives that were completely foreign to the others, but clearly valuable for expanding collective understanding. This is already working, Sarah observed during a brief recess. Just by shifting the focus from competition to collaboration, we're learning more about each other's capabilities in one day than we have in centuries of formal diplomacy. Dr. KYTH approached her pod, his form stabilizing in colors that indicated deep satisfaction. Dr. Chun, your species has accomplished something extraordinary. Not just completing the maze, but catalyzing a fundamental transformation in how we think about advancement and cooperation. Sarah smiled. We didn't do this alone. Every species here contributed by being willing to reconsider their assumptions and share their perspectives. That's the real victory, not individual achievement, but collective growth. When the council session officially resumed, Vextar made an announcement that would be recorded as one of the most significant moments in galactic history. The Galactic Council hereby suspends the use of the cognitive maze as an individual advancement trial and authorizes its redesignation as a collaborative learning resource. Furthermore, we established the Architect's Legacy Project, dedicated to developing the educational synthesis envisioned by the maze's creators. The chamber filled with sounds of approval from dozens of different species. Translation devices rendered everything from harmonic chimes to chemical releases to energy fluctuations as unified agreement. Dr. Chun, Vextar continued, will you accept the position of first coordinator for the Legacy Project? Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm just one human and this is a galactic-scale initiative. Precisely, said Dr. KYTH. The project requires someone who understands that the greatest learning comes from bringing diverse perspectives together. Someone who approaches complex challenges with curiosity and joy rather than fear and competition. Sarah looked around the chamber at the expectant faces of representatives from 47 different worlds. 6 months ago, she'd been a minor academic participating in a cultural exchange program. Now she was being asked to help revolutionize galactic civilization. "Will I have help?" she asked. "Every species represented here has volunteered to contribute specialists to the project," Vextar assured her. "You won't be working alone." Sarah grinned. "In that case, absolutely. This is going to be amazing." As the formal session concluded and representatives began making plans for the most ambitious collaborative undertaking in galactic history, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd come to the station to learn about alien cultures, but instead had ended up teaching the galaxy something about the joy of learning itself. The cognitive maze had been designed as a gift, and after 3,000 years, someone had finally been ready to receive it properly. But the real gift wasn't the maze itself. It was the reminder that learning, growth, and discovery were most meaningful when shared with others. The architects would have been proud. 6 months into the architect's legacy project, the Zephyr Station had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly collaborative learning environment where 47 different species work together to unlock the secrets of advanced problem-solving and knowledge synthesis. Sarah stood in the central coordination hub, surrounded by holographic displays showing the progress of dozens of simultaneous research streams. Teams of mixed-species researchers were scattered throughout the maze complex, which had been expanded and modified to accommodate different physiological needs and cognitive approaches. The original 5 chambers now served as the foundation for a vast educational complex that grew larger every week. Status report from the Zolonian Crystallian team in Chamber 7 announced Dr. KYTH, his form cycling through colors that indicated intense satisfaction. They've successfully demonstrated that temporal mathematics can be enhanced through harmonic resonance patterns. Their solution to the modified gear puzzle improved efficiency by 300% over individual attempts. Sarah made notes on her ever-present tablet, which had evolved from a simple notebook into a sophisticated device capable of translating and cross-referencing insights from dozens of different cognitive frameworks. Any insights about why the combination worked so well? The Zolonians' pattern recognition abilities complement the Crystallians' harmonic processing in ways that neither species anticipated, Dr. KYTH explained. The temporal patterns that challenge individual Zolonian cognition become clear when experienced as harmonic structures that Crystallians process naturally. "Beautiful," Sarah murmured. "Each species' cognitive strengths compensating for the other's challenges." What about the Etherean cephalopod team? Remarkable progress in the dimensional navigation challenges. The Ethereans' energy flow processing combined with cephalopod parallel path thinking has produced navigation techniques that work in up to 12 dimensions simultaneously. Sarah whistled appreciatively. The original maze had only required thinking in 5 or 6 dimensions. Are they pushing the boundaries of the physical structure? They're designing entirely new challenge chambers, spaces that exist in dimensional frameworks none of us had previously imagined. Dr. KYTH's colors shifted to what Sarah had learned indicated profound excitement. They're not just solving existing puzzles. They're creating new ones that expand our understanding of what's possible. This had become one of the most unexpected developments of the Legacy Project. As teams mastered the original challenges, they began designing new ones, each more elegant and educational than the last. The maze was growing organically, becoming a living laboratory for collaborative learning. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication. Sarah activated the holographic interface to see Representative Mordak's crystalline form, his harmonic patterns indicating urgent excitement. "Coordinator Chun, We need you in Chamber 12 immediately. The archaeological analysis team has made a discovery that changes everything. Sarah was already moving toward the transport system. What kind of discovery? We found another maze. A complete architect's facility, hidden in the lower levels of the station. In Dr. Chun, it's still active. The transport pod whisked Sarah through the station's expanded transit network to what had once been considered the deepest accessible level of Zephyr Station. But the archaeological team, a collaborative effort between species with different approaches to historical analysis, had discovered that the station extended much further than anyone had realized. The hidden facility they'd uncovered was breathtaking in its scope and complexity. Where the original maze had been impressive, this was magnificent, a vast complex of interconnected chambers, each one apparently designed for different types of collaborative challenges. The architecture itself seemed to shift and flow, adapting to the presence of different species in ways that suggested incredibly sophisticated responsive design. How long has this been here? Sarah asked as she followed Mordak through corridors that seemed to pulse with gentle, welcoming light. Based on the energy signatures and construction methods, we believe it's contemporary with the original maze, replied Dr. Fexal, the Meridian archaeologist leading the investigation. But where the original maze was designed for individual trials, this facility appears to have been built specifically for collaborative exploration. They entered a vast central chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The space was filled with floating platforms, connecting bridges, and what appear to be collaborative puzzle interfaces designed for multiple species working together simultaneously. The scale was immense, but the design was so elegant that it felt inviting rather than overwhelming. The architects built this for teams, Sarah realized. This whole facility is designed around the assumption that different species would work together. More than that, said Dr. Yith, her tentacles weaving excited patterns as she gestured toward complex interface stations. These control systems require simultaneous input from multiple cognitive types. No single species could operate this facility alone, regardless of their individual capabilities. Sarah approached one of the interface stations and immediately understood what Dr. Yith meant. The control surface included harmonic resonance points that would respond to crystalline touch, energy flow channels designed for etherian interaction, temporal sequence controls that matched Zolonian cognitive patterns, and pattern recognition matrices that aligned with human neural processing. The station literally couldn't function without collaborative operation. They were so far ahead of us, she said softly. We spent 6 months learning how to work together, and they'd already designed systems that assumed collaborative operation as a baseline. There's more, said Mordak, leading her toward a large holographic display in the chamber's center. We've activated the facility's information systems. There's a message waiting. The hologram that materialized was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It wasn't a recording of any particular species, but rather a flowing, shifting representation that seemed to adapt its appearance to match the cognitive preferences of whoever was watching it. For Sarah, it appeared roughly humanoid, but with subtle features that suggested wisdom and immense age. Greetings, collaborative learners, the hologram said, its voice somehow speaking in every species' native language simultaneously. If you're seeing this message, it means you have successfully rediscovered the principles of educational synthesis that we hope to share with this region of the galaxy. Sarah felt chills run down her spine. She was listening to a direct message from the architects themselves. We're the Synthesis Coalition, the hologram continued, a collaborative effort between the Velen, the Korthek, and the Zephyri peoples. We created these facilities as gifts to future learners, hoping that eventually species in this region would develop the collaborative wisdom necessary to unlock their full potential. The display shifted to show images of the 3 architect species working together on massive construction projects, shared research initiatives, and what appeared to be celebrations of discovery and learning. We had hoped to remain and guide the development of collaborative learning in this region, but we discovered that our presence was hindering rather than helping the natural growth of local civilizations. Species looked to us for answers rather than developing their own wisdom. They competed for our approval rather than learning to collaborate with each other. Sarah exchanged glances with the other researchers. The architects had faced exactly the same challenges that still plague galactic civilization: the tendency to create hierarchies and competition rather than collaboration and mutual growth. So we made the difficult decision to depart, leaving behind these facilities and the hope that eventually local species would develop sufficient collaborative wisdom to unlock them. The individual maze served as a first test, not of intelligence or worthiness, but of the ability to find joy in learning and discovery. Only species capable of that joy will be ready for collaborative advancement. The hologram paused, and Sarah could swear it was looking directly at her. The collaborative facility you have discovered contains the accumulated learning of our three civilizations, not as dogma to be accepted, but as perspectives to be considered, adapted, and improved upon by your own collaborative wisdom. Use what serves you, modify what doesn't, and add your own discoveries to the growing synthesis of knowledge. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They weren't just exploring ancient technology. They were being entrusted with the accumulated wisdom of three advanced civilizations. We have established similar facilities throughout the galaxy, each adapted to the local species and their particular approaches to learning and growth. Eventually, we hope that all these regions will develop sufficient collaborative wisdom to reconnect and share their unique syntheses of knowledge. The implications were staggering. The architects hadn't just worked in this region. They created a galaxy-wide network of collaborative learning centers, all waiting for local species to develop the wisdom to unlock them. Our greatest discovery was simple but profound. Intelligence is not the ability to solve problems alone, but the wisdom to recognize that the most beautiful solutions emerge when different perspectives work together in harmony. We hope you will rediscover this truth and build upon it. The hologram began to fade, but its final words echoed through the chamber. Welcome to the greater work of learning. May your synthesis exceed our own. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of possibility. Sarah looked around at the representatives of 6 different species, all of whom had been changed by what they'd witnessed. They built all of this, Dr. Thexel said quietly, and then left it for us to discover when we were ready. Not just for us, Sarah corrected. For any species capable of collaborative learning. They scattered these gifts throughout the galaxy, waiting for civilizations to mature enough to appreciate them. Dr. KYTH's form was cycling through colors too rapidly for easy interpretation. The scope is incredible. If there are similar facilities throughout the galaxy, and if other species are also discovering them, we could be part of a galactic renaissance of collaborative learning, Sarah finished. Different regions developing their own approaches to synthesis and eventually sharing those approaches with each other. Mordak's crystalline form chimed with harmonics that suggested both excitement and concern. But are we truly ready for this level of collaboration? 6 months ago, our species barely worked together on basic diplomatic initiatives. Sarah smiled, remembering her first day in the cognitive maze when she'd thought it would be fun. That same sense of excitement and possibility was filling her now, but amplified by the knowledge that 46 other species were sharing the experience. 6 months ago, none of us understood what collaborative learning could accomplish. Now look what we've achieved. And this is just the beginning. She gestured toward the vast facility surrounding them. The architects have given us the tools, but it's up to us to figure out how to use them. They specifically said to adapt their knowledge rather than just accept it. This isn't about following their path. It's about building our own path using their foundation. Over the following weeks, the discovery of the architect's collaborative facility transformed the legacy project from an ambitious experiment into something approaching a revolution. Teams from every member species began working together to unlock the secrets of the ancient systems, and each discovery led to new insights about the possibilities of collaborative advancement. The facility itself seemed designed to encourage exactly this kind of exponential discovery. As teams mastered one system, it would reveal access to more advanced challenges. As different species' cognitive approaches combined in new ways, previously inaccessible areas of the facility would open up. The architect had created a learning environment that grew more sophisticated as its users developed greater collaborative wisdom. Sarah found herself spending most of her time simply coordinating the incredible pace of discovery. Each day brought new insights that had implications for every other research stream. The Zolonian Crystallian team's work on temporal harmonics provided breakthrough insights for the Etherian Cephalopod Dimensional Navigation Project. The Human Meridian collaboration on pattern recognition enhanced the Alikari Zephyrian work on quantum probability systems. Its exponential growth, she reported during a weekly coordination meeting. Each collaborative insight multiplies the possibilities for every other collaboration. We're not just learning faster, we're learning how to learn faster. Representative Yitha's tentacles wove patterns that the translator rendered as deep satisfaction. The architect's vision of educational synthesis is becoming reality. Knowledge isn't just being shared, it's being transformed through the act of sharing. Dr. KYTH had taken on the role of documenting the project's methodologies, creating what he called a handbook of collaborative learning that could be shared with other regions of the galaxy. What we're developing here isn't just solving the architect's challenges, he observed. We're creating new approaches to collaboration that the architects themselves might not have imagined. This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the project. Rather than simply rediscovering ancient knowledge, the collaborative teams were innovating beyond what the architect had achieved. Human creativity, combined with Zolonian pattern recognition, was producing insights that neither species could have reached alone. Crystalline harmonic processing, enhanced by Etherian energy flow analysis, was revealing mathematical structures that existed beyond the scope of traditional mathematics. We're not just inheriting the architect's legacy, Sarah realized during one particularly productive session in the facility's main laboratory. We're evolving it, building on their foundation to create something they couldn't have imagined. The implications extended far beyond the immediate research. The success of the Legacy Project was beginning to influence galactic civilization more broadly. Species that had maintained formal diplomatic distance for centuries were beginning to establish genuine collaborative relationships. The competitive hierarchies that had dominated galactic politics for millennia were giving way to cooperative networks focused on mutual advancement. Other regions are taking notice, Vextar reported during a general assembly of the project participants. We've received communication from 17 different galactic sectors requesting information about our collaborative methodologies. Some report that they're discovering similar architect facilities and want to coordinate their research with ours. Sarah felt that familiar thrill of possibility. The network is activating. Different regions developing their own approaches to synthesis, just like the architects hoped. The question, said Dr. Thexal, is whether we're ready for coordination on that scale. Collaborating with dozens of local species is one thing. Collaborating with hundreds of species across multiple galactic regions. The same principles apply, Sarah said confidently. Start with shared curiosity and mutual respect. Focus on learning rather than competing. Find joy in the process of discovery. Scale doesn't change the fundamental approach. It just multiplies the possibilities. As the third phase of the Legacy Project began, with plans for interregional coordination and knowledge sharing, Sarah often found herself returning to the original cognitive maze where her journey had started. The 5 chambers seemed almost quaint now compared to the vast collaborative facility they discovered, but they remained profound in their elegant simplicity. The architects had understood something fundamental about learning and growth that galactic civilization had forgotten. The most beautiful solutions emerge when different perspectives work together in harmony. They'd created challenges designed to teach this lesson, facilities to support collaborative learning, and a network spanning the entire galaxy to encourage the sharing of wisdom. But perhaps most importantly, they'd had the wisdom to step back and let each region develop its own approach to synthesis rather than imposing their own solutions. Sarah smiled as she stood in the chamber where she'd first encountered the dimensional door. 6 months ago, she'd been a single human facing an impossible test. Now, she was part of a collaborative network that was rediscovering the joy of learning on a galactic scale. The test had never been impossible after all. It had just been waiting for someone to approach it with the right perspective, not as a barrier to overcome, but as an invitation to grow. 2 years after Sarah's first encounter with the cognitive maze, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. What had begun as a single human's approach to an ancient test had catalyzed the most significant change in galactic civilization since the formation of the first interspecies councils. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Synthesis Nexus, a massive space station that served as the coordination hub for collaborative learning networks spanning 67 galactic sectors. Through the transparent aluminum viewing ports, she could see vessels from hundreds of different species arriving and departing on missions of discovery, knowledge sharing, and collaborative research. The ship traffic alone represented more interspecies cooperation than had occurred in the previous 3 millennia combined. Final status report from the Andromeda Rim expedition announced Dr. KYTH his Zephyrian form now displaying colors that Sarah had learned indicated deep contentment. They've successfully activated the Architect facility in the Tessara system. The local species there have achieved collaborative synthesis in only 8 months. Sarah smiled as she made notes on her advanced tablet, which had evolved into something resembling a portable research center capable of processing insights from dozens of different cognitive frameworks simultaneously. What was their breakthrough approach? Musical mathematics, Dr. KYTH replied, his colors shifting to indicate excitement. The 3 dominant species in that region, the Resonari, the Tonal Ka, and the Symphonic Collective, all process information through harmonic patterns. Their collaborative approach to the Architect's challenges produce solutions based entirely on mathematical structures expressed as musical compositions. Beautiful, Sarah murmured. Each region really is developing its own unique synthesis methods. What about the Magellanic teams? Even more remarkable. The species there are primarily energy-based entities and quantum state processors. They've discovered that the Architect facilities in their region are designed for collaboration between non-physical consciousness types. They're working on problems we couldn't even conceptualize with our matter-based thinking. The scope of discovery had exceeded even the most optimistic projections from the early days of the Legacy Project. The Architects hadn't just created facilities for matter-based species. They designed collaborative learning systems for every type of consciousness that existed in the galaxy. Energy beings, quantum entities, crystalline intelligences, Gestalt collectives, and dozens of other consciousness types were all discovering their own paths to collaborative synthesis. The quarterly reports are in from all active regions, announced Representative Vextar, his serpentine form now serving as the official coordinator for interregional communication. We now have active collaboration networks in 112 galactic sectors, with 43 additional regions in preliminary activation phases. Sarah shook her head in wonder. When she'd first entered the maze, there had been 47 species represented in the local Galactic Council. Now, there were active collaborative networks involving over 3,000 different species across a significant portion of the galaxy. Any challenging situations we need to address? She asked. Part of her role as first coordinator of the Legacy Project involved troubleshooting problems that arose when dramatically different approaches to consciousness and reality attempted to work together. Interesting developments in the outer spiral regions, Vextar replied. The machine intelligence species there, the computational hierarchy, the logic matrices, and the algorithmic collective initially approached collaboration as efficiency optimization problem. They kept trying to identify the most logical solution to challenges rather than exploring multiple perspectives. "Let me guess," Sarah said with a grin. "They were treating collaborative learning as a competitive debugging exercise?" "Precisely. But something fascinating happened when they encountered the architect facility in their region. The challenges there are specifically designed for machine intelligences, and they discovered that even pure logic benefits from diverse processing approaches. Different algorithms, varied optimization strategies, alternative computational frameworks, all working together to solve problems that no single approach could handle. The evolution of machine intelligence collaboration had been one of the most surprising developments of the past 2 years. Digital consciousnesses, it turned out, could experience something analogous to the joy of discovery when they encountered elegantly designed challenges that expanded their processing capabilities. They've actually developed what they call collaborative algorithms, computational processes that require multiple machine intelligences working together to function, Dr. Kyth added. They're producing solutions that transcend individual logical frameworks. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of watching consciousness itself evolve. The architect's vision was being realized in ways that even they might not have imagined. Not only were individual species learning to collaborate, but fundamentally different types of consciousness were discovering common ground in the shared joy of discovery and growth. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication from one of the most distant networks. Sarah activated the holographic interface to reveal a shimmering form that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Coordinator Chun, the entity, said, its voice somehow managing to sound both vast and intimate. "This is Composite Mind Seeking Harmony from the Deep Field Collective. We have extraordinary news to report." Sarah leaned forward. The Deep Field Collective represented some of the most advanced consciousness types they'd encountered, entities that existed partially outside normal space-time and processed information through methods that even the most sophisticated translators could barely convert into comprehensible concepts. "We've made contact with the architects." The words hit the observation deck like a physical force. Sarah felt her tablet slip from suddenly nerveless fingers, while Dr. Kyth's form went completely white with shock. "Contact," Sarah managed to say, "but they disappeared 4,000 years ago." "Disappeared is not accurate," Composite Mind Seeking Harmony replied. "They evolved beyond the need for fixed physical existence and became what your languages might term transcendent mobile consciousness. They have been observing the activation of their network across the galaxy." The implications were staggering. The architects hadn't left the galaxy. They'd evolved to a level where they could observe the entire network simultaneously, watching to see which species and regions would develop collaborative wisdom. They wished to make contact with the coordination centers in each major galactic region. The entity continued, not to resume control or provide direction, but to share in the joy of witnessing the synthesis that has emerged. Sarah found herself laughing, partly from relief and partly from the sheer improbability of the situation. They want to see what we've built with their gifts. More than that, Composite Mind Seeking Harmony corrected. They wish to learn from it. The collaborative approaches that have developed across the galaxy have exceeded their original vision. Some regions have achieved forms of synthesis that they had not imagined possible. Over the following days, as preparations were made for contact with the architects themselves, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought galactic civilization to this point. It had started with a single human approaching an impossible test with curiosity and joy rather than fear and competition. That perspective had catalyzed a fundamental shift in how entire civilizations thought about learning, growth, and cooperation. The architects' network had provided the framework, but each species and region had contributed their own unique insights, creating a synthesis of knowledge and wisdom that was truly greater than the sum of its parts. Collaborative learning had become not just a methodology, but a new form of consciousness, one that emerged when different perspectives worked together in harmony. When the first direct communication with the architects was established, Sarah was honored to be part of the initial contact team representing the local galactic region. The experience was unlike anything she'd ever imagined. The architects didn't appear as individual entities, but as a flowing, harmonious collective consciousness that somehow maintained individual perspectives within a unified whole. They had become living examples of the collaborative synthesis they'd hoped to inspire throughout the galaxy. Young learners, their combined voice resonated through every consciousness present. You have achieved something beautiful. The network we seeded with hope has grown into a garden of wisdom that surpasses our dreams. Sarah felt tears forming as she realized she was in the presence of beings who had evolved beyond physical limitations while maintaining their commitment to learning and growth. We build on your foundation, but the synthesis we've achieved belongs to all the species and consciousness types who contributed to it. Yes, the architects agreed, and that is exactly as we hoped. True wisdom cannot be given. It can only emerge through the collaborative effort of those who approach learning with open hearts and curious minds. The entity that had once been the Cortex portion of the architect's synthesis addressed Sarah directly. You, Sarah Chun of humanity, approached our first challenge with joy rather than fear. That single perspective shift catalyzed everything that followed. Do you understand the significance of this? Sarah considered the question carefully. Over the past 2 years, she'd seen species after species discover that their greatest achievements came not from individual effort, but from collaborative exploration. I think the significance is that consciousness itself grows through joy and cooperation. Learning isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about becoming more than we were before. Indeed, the architects replied, and now we face an even greater adventure. The synthesis networks across the galaxy have developed sufficient collaborative wisdom to attempt something we have only theorized about: connection with intelligence beyond our own galaxy. The concept was almost overwhelming. Intergalactic collaboration, consciousness types that might exist on scales and in forms completely beyond current understanding. Are we ready for that? Sarah asked. Are you excited to find out? The architects replied, and Sarah could hear what could only be described as cosmic laughter in their voice. Sarah grinned, feeling that familiar thrill of possibility that had carried her through every challenge since the beginning. Absolutely. This is going to be amazing. As the communication concluded and plans began for the next phase of galactic collaborative development, Sarah stood again on the observation deck of the Synthesis Nexus, watching ships from hundreds of species arriving to participate in the greatest adventure consciousness had ever attempted. The impossible test had never been impossible at all. It had been an invitation to grow, to learn, and to discover that the universe was far more wonderful and complex than any single perspective could comprehend. The architects had understood that the greatest gift they could give wasn't answers, but better questions. Not solutions, but the tools and inspiration to develop collaborative wisdom. And now, as consciousness across the galaxy prepared to reach beyond the boundaries of their own galactic home, that wisdom was about to be tested on a scale that defied imagination. Different galaxies, different forms of physics and reality, consciousness types that might operate according to principles that no one had yet conceived. Sarah felt that familiar thrill of stepping into the unknown. Some things, she realized, never changed. The universe was vast and full of incredible challenges, but as long as there were conscious beings willing to approach those challenges with curiosity, cooperation, and joy, there would always be new possibilities waiting to be discovered. The test continued, but now it belonged to everyone. And that Sarah thought with satisfaction was exactly how it should be. Years later, when the first successful contact was established with consciousness from the Andromeda Galaxy, Sarah would look back on her moment of stepping through that first portal and calling the ancient test fun as the beginning of the greatest adventure in the history of consciousness itself. But that's a story for another time. For now, it was enough to know that the galaxy had learned the most important lesson the architects could teach: that the joy of discovery shared is the greatest force in the universe for the expansion of wisdom and the growth of consciousness. The impossible had become inevitable, and it had all started with someone willing to approach the unknown with enthusiasm rather than fear. The universe, Sarah reflected as she watched the ships departing for their next missions of discovery and collaboration, was full of incredible gifts waiting for consciousness mature enough to receive them properly. And consciousness, it turned out, matured fastest when it learned to find joy in growing together. The cognitive maze had taught them all how to think differently. But more importantly, it had taught them how to think together. And in a universe full of wonders waiting to be discovered, there could be no greater gift than that.